Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence. Today we are looking at Made You Up by Francesca Zappia. It was published by HarperCollins and the ratings on Goodreads is 4.1 stars and Amazon 4.5 stars. Sydney and I differ slightly on our rating. I gave it 3 stars and she gave it 2 stars.
So I thought first we'd start again with the book description just so that you can remind yourself what happens in this book. Reality, it turns out, is often not what you perceive it to be. Sometimes there really is someone out to get you. For fans of Silver Linings Playbook and Liar, this thought-provoking debut tells the story of Alex, a high school senior, and the ultimate unreliable narrator, unable to tell the difference between real life and delusions. This is a compelling and provoking literary debut that will appeal to fans of Wes Anderson and Liar. Alex fights a daily battle to figure out what is real and what is not. Armed with a take-no-prisoners attitude, her camera, a magic 8-ball, and her own ally, her little sister, Alex wages war against her schizophrenia, determined to stay sane long enough to get into college. She's pretty optimistic about her chances, until she runs into Miles. Didn't she imagine him? Before she knows it, Alex is making friends, going to parties, falling in love, and experiencing all the usual rites of passage for teenagers. But Alex is used to being crazy. She's not prepared for normal. Can she trust herself? Can we trust her? Funny, provoking, and ultimately moving, this debut novel featuring the quintessential unreliable narrator will have readers turning the pages and trying to figure out what is real and what is made up. So, after reading the book description, what did you think of the idea of this book?
I think the idea is really nice. It's nice to see a book that teenagers could read about a condition that they might have and be able to see someone to relate to, because it is more of a teenager novel. I do also like that she has also included Miles, who has his own sort of issues to go on with as well. So you've got that another layer as well. So
this whole entire book is about Alex, and she is suffering with schizophrenia. And I guess the question for her is what is real life and what isn't. So that is quite interesting, because all the way through the book you kind of go, is this what is real or really happening, or is this actually something that she is hallucinating?
Yeah, sometimes it's obvious because it's something like
a bit crazy.
Well, yeah, like it's something really out there, but then sometimes it's everyday things. And I actually learned quite a lot about schizophrenia from this book because I didn't really know too much about it, so wanted to know a bit more to see whether what she was suffering was typical as well.
I did too. I did quite a lot of research on the aspect of schizophrenia. In this particular book, I had read it before, so before I gave it to you to read, I had given it a rating of 4 stars. However, as a result of going back and looking into schizophrenia, I had to reduce my rating just to 2 stars, and I'll explain to you as we go through why I thought perhaps it wasn't as good as I originally thought.
Yeah, I mean, I know that especially as teenagers very rarely get diagnosed. In England, I know they don't like to diagnose mental health illnesses in children and young adults until they're about 16, if not 18, because of the hormonal issues which can actually show like a mental illness.
At the beginning of the book, we meet Alex. She's a 17-year-old senior who has been kicked out of her previous school because she spray-painted the gym. I thought this was hilarious. She spray-painted the gym's floor with the words communists because she was having an episode, as they describe it. So she was having some hallucinations and decided that that was the best thing to do.
Well, she gets very paranoid, doesn't she, that she is surrounded by communists in her moments, that she's surrounded by people that, are out to get her as well. Yeah.
The book describes her particular type of schizophrenia as paranoid schizophrenia. And I know from the past, I mean, I'm no expert on schizophrenia in any way, shape or form. I don't think I've met someone who suffers from schizophrenia, but from what I understand and from some Googling, I found out that paranoid schizophrenia is no longer typically diagnosed anymore. you either get a schizophrenia diagnosis or you don't have a diagnosis at all. So they've dropped all of the prefixes to schizophrenia.
Well, isn't that because actually all of the different types of schizophrenia have a level of paranoia, have a level of the different delusions and that?
Exactly. So if you were reading this book and you had no knowledge of that, you would just automatically assume that there were still different types of schizophrenia. The thing that I kind of was quite annoyed by was the fact that this book is written in 2015 and the new definitions from the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistics Manual for Mental Health Conditions, was actually published in 2013. And so I found this out in about 5 minutes of Googling to find the classification and the diagnostic criteria, and then discovered that you're not called a paranoid schizophrenic anymore.
Okay. But I suppose that she had her diagnosis before, so if she'd had it for several years, she would have been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. Then it's changed afterwards.
That's true, I guess. But I don't know, if you are diagnosed with Asperger's, have you not now also been reclassified as being on autistic spectrum disorder?
Yeah,
child?
But a lot of children will still call themselves Asperger's.
I guess that's true.
But I agree that, maybe that should have been identified by the author in some way.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have added to the story, but it would have made it a little bit more realistic, I think. Is by ensuring that you use the correct terminology for these particular illnesses.
Yeah, definitely.
She experiences delusions and hallucinations, so...
But these are a bit muddled, aren't they, in the book? I found it very hard to decide what was a delusion and a hallucination. And as you're reading the book, I suppose it doesn't really matter because it just is in the book. But it's actually I know you picked up on some areas where the author actually wrote, I'm having a delusion, when it was a hallucination. Yeah.
Yep. So I'll talk about a bit more about that in a minute, because I think it's something we should explore a bit further.
Yeah. Have you got definitions for those though? Like what the difference
delusion
are?
And hallucination?
Yeah.
I do indeed. So we will go through those.
Yeah.
So for her particular delusions are the fact that she thinks that she's being followed around by Nazis, and the Nazis and the communists are out to get her. And
not that they were friends, but yeah.
No.
Sorry, the history teacher in me.
But she spends quite a lot of time incessantly checking for trackers and poison in her food. But I don't know about you, but I felt that at points that this was potentially used as a reminder to let everyone remember that she is someone who is suffering from schizophrenia. It's not necessarily really explored in any way.
Yeah, it never sort of comes at when those started or why it's particularly them, because usually, from what I understand, schizophrenics, when they do have these delusions, it's tied to something that they've read or something that they've watched or something like that then triggers those kind of links. So what she'd learned about the Nazis and the communists, when did she learn about that? How did it then manifest into a paranoid delusion?
Exactly. And so something that seems to be very important to her behaviour isn't necessarily explored very deeply. I thought that was somewhere that could have been expanded upon in the book.
Yeah.
Alex has a part-time job in the evenings at a local diner called Finnegan's, and that's when we first meet her friend Tucker. And Tucker is the only person that she knows that goes to the new school that she's about to start. And at her time, while she is at the diner, she uses or asks questions of the Magic 8 Ball, and the Magic 8 Ball likes to give her confusing answers, like...
They always do.
Yeah, it's a Magic 8 Ball, so I guess that's life. We discover with some of her musings that Alex's symptoms began at the age of 7. When she was taken to the doctors, she didn't realise, obviously at 7, that there's something wrong with her.
Well, you would just think, kids have imaginary friends, they have a very vivid imagination at that age. So I think as a parent, some of it you might just assume was her imagination.
Exactly. But she describes in great detail some hallucinations of a bright pink lobster in a lobster tank that is talking to her. So she has both visual and auditory hallucinations according to her writings in the book.
Is that quite unusual to be diagnosed that young?
It is actually. So I spent some time looking at some information as to when is the typical time for someone to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so I'm going to read you a short passage that I will give a link to. This is from the Mayo Clinic. Schizophrenia involves a range of problems with thinking, behaviour or emotions. Signs and symptoms may vary, but usually involve delusions, hallucinations, disorganised speech, and reflected impaired ability to function. The effect can be disabling. Schizophrenia symptoms generally start in the mid to late 20s. It's uncommon for children to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Early onset schizophrenia occurs before age 18. Very early onset schizophrenia in children younger than age 13 is extremely rare, but possible. So even though it is very rare, there is a possibility that Alex could have been diagnosed with schizophrenia that early.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that might be because of the imaginative side of childhood. And so how do you know that, yes, I could describe a lobster talking to me at the age of 7 probably, and my parents probably wouldn't have got me diagnosed.
That is true.
So I wonder what else was going on with her. They never really explore any of the triggers at 7 that caused her to go and get diagnosed, because actually, I'm quite interested in what would have done that.
And it seems that the only reasons for them to have taken her to get diagnosed was this thing about her making up people.
Yeah.
And talking to lobsters in a lobster tank. So again, I looked at what would have indicated the potential for schizophrenia, and that includes things such as language delays, late or unusual crawling, late walking, and other abnormal motor behaviours, for example, rocking or arm flapping, which none of these are discussed within the book. Further on, it goes on to talk about, in teenagers, what you may see, such as withdrawal from friends and family, a drop in performance at school, trouble sleeping, irritability or depressed mood, lack of motivation, strange behaviour, substance use, and then later on...
Some of those also just sound like being a normal teenager.
That is true. That is
It would be very hard to separate those.
I think so. I think that's probably why they don't usually diagnose schizophrenia until a bit later on, just because you're getting past the way that bodies change until you get to a certain point.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, compared with schizophrenia symptoms in adults, teens may be less likely to have delusions and more likely to have visual hallucinations.
Oh, okay.
So there is some benefit in what Zappia is describing within these.
But the fact that it's probably quite unusual that she's having both and that she had such an early onset.
I must admit, in all of the research that I did, I couldn't necessarily find... You could have both, but it was less common than having one or the other. And by the seam of things, it would seem that auditory hallucinations are much more prevalent than visual hallucinations.
Yeah.
So that's like people talking to you and telling you off and being rude and that kind of thing, and telling you to do stuff. That's the other thing.
Your brain actually, making visual things that you can physically see must be a harder thing for it to get to, whereas hearing voices, we all have a voice inside of our head, so it's not a big step to then start maybe your brain coming up with different voices, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense to me. So in this book, as she said from the beginning of the book description, she remembers a boy who has bright blue eyes, who she refers to as Blue Eyes, very original, who helped her to release lobsters from the lobster tank at the local grocery store. She doesn't know if it's real or not.
He helps lift her up, doesn't he?
He does help lift her up to get to the lobsters.
She's too little.
And I think he also comments on how heavy she is, which made me giggle. But she feels that the lobsters are talking to her, that they're bright red, and that when she tries to free them, they tell her thank you, which I thought was quite sweet. I'm like, that's a very polite lobster.
I think if I was freed for a tank, I'd say thank you to the person who'd freed me as well.
She uses her camera to check if what she is seeing is actually real. So if she takes a photo, then in that photo, if there is something that shouldn't be there, it will fade with time. So it's a way for her to be able to check whether she's hallucinating. But obviously at this time she didn't know that there was a problem, so she spends quite a lot of the first part of the book questioning whether Blue Eyes was actually real and she didn't just make him up. But it turns out Blue Eyes is real. Yeah.
She never asked her mum. It always wondered me, like, why didn't she ask her mum? Because her mum was there. So she could have said to her mum, was there another child when I did the lobster thing?
But she does later on in the book say that she asked her mum about the lobsters, and she says that she has this memory, and her mum does dismiss that as a memory.
She says, yes, there were lobsters, but you never released them, but she caught her near the tank.
Yeah.
So the day she caught her near the tank, she could have said, oh, and there was another boy there, but no one says anything like that.
She may not have seen him, I don't know.
No, yeah, but yeah.
But while she's working at Finnegan's, Miles comes into the diner. She doesn't recognise him as Blue Eyes until she goes up to his table and he looks at her and...
With his blue eyes.
With his baby blues. And she's like, hang on a minute, maybe he's actually real. Could this be Blue Eyes?
They must be very distinctly blue because a lot of people do have blue eyes.
You would assume that they would be a distinct kind of blue because, otherwise...
She must have met more people with blue eyes at that point.
Don't know, maybe Francesca has written this as a town where there's only one guy in the whole entire planet that has blue eyes. Who knows?
Yeah.
But Miles then becomes quite a key character to the overall story.
I quite like him as a character.
I do, but I'm going to tell you a bit more about why I find it a little bit trickier later on, if that's all right.
Okay.
We'll keep going through the story if that's all right. Alex goes to school. It's her first day at a brand new school. She realises that Miles goes to that school too. Coincidence.
Ooh.
And her locker is next to his, and they engage in this hate-hate relationship. So because she acted a little strange at the diner, he decides that he has a bit of a practical joking streak, and he does lots of different things to her, and she retaliates.
It's almost like that little boys push you over to tell you that they like you.
It did remind me of that. And later on, it turns out that all of a sudden it changes from a hate-hate relationship to a love-love relationship. So yeah, there is a romantic connection later on in the story. As part of her changing schools, she is expected to do something called community service, which involves working in the gym after school. And it turns out, shock horror, that Miles happens to be the leader, would you say?
He seems to be the person who's also got to do community service, but the one that actually directs everybody to what they're going to do.
It also, when you start to get to know Miles a bit more, you can start to see that there are some traits in his behaviour that could indicate autism. And so I think he lies somewhere on the autistic spectrum. And as I don't know much about this, I'm going to pass this over to you. So what kind of things do we read that Miles does that could indicate he is on the autistic spectrum?
They come up with things like that he doesn't like to be touched at one point, which is common among autistics, although saying that, it is one of the stereotypes that actually a lot of autistic people do not mind being touched. It's just they don't mind being touched by strangers and they want to wait till they get to know you, which actually I'm the same. So it is one of those things that happens. It's also the fact that he's highly intelligent. Now, there's only about 5% of autistic diagnosis that actually include a high level of intelligence. Mostly it is because most autistics do have a good knowledge of certain subjects because they're fascinated by them, and then they look into them more and more, and it's that fixation that causes them to have good knowledge of that subject. But he does seem to have a high intelligence about everything and is able to answer the question, whatever they're doing in class before they've even started the lesson. So he does seem to have that as well.
What did you think about the history stuff? I thought, you being a bit of a history buff because you are a history teacher, that you would appreciate the questioning of the history stuff. Because
I did.
Alex's dad is an archaeologist,
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
So I thought you would...
I did. I liked all the history references and the fact that there's often in history class that they're discussed, or in English class where they're talking about books and things. So I did appreciate all of that sort of setting. And that it's sort of a shared interest that Miles and Alex end up having, because obviously she has a fixation with the Nazis and history in general. And so they play a game where they ask him 20 questions and he's got to guess who they are in this club. And different people do it. And he's always able to guess really, really quickly, which part of me goes, okay, they're trying to make him out to be this sort of really bright autistic person. And so he sort of guesses it probably quicker than anybody would without really any idea. But it's because he knows those people so well, he can guess who they're picking rather than the fact that he's guessing from the questions that they're actually asking. But with her, partly because she's new to the group and partly because she has a good history knowledge, she's able to pick people that are quite obscure, but it's quite impressed by him when he's actually able to guess, and there's a history that I don't even know. It was, I think it was something like the Egyptian princes or something that they went into.
It was very obscure.
And he could name like all the different levels of prince, and they knew that it was this particular one that she was talking about. So it's very interesting that they do go into all of that. Other things that make him look like he's autistic is the fact that he doesn't really have many friends. He doesn't interact with them very well. He usually likes being on his own, which is quite an autistic trait. Although autism is actually broken down into the fact that they've got sort of 3 areas that are deficits in social emotional interaction with each other, non-verbal communication between social interaction, and also maintaining and understanding relationships. Those are sort of the 3 areas. It does mean that there is a lot of symptoms that also come out of that. So there's a lot of repetitive behaviour, things like stereotyping, use of motor movements, insistence on the sameness, usually inflexibility. Most autistic children have a real grasp of justice. They're really into what's just and unjust and what the rules are and what the rules aren't. And if you cross that line, it being, quite hard for them to understand. The grey areas are particularly difficult. Everything's quite black and white. They usually have fixated interests, and one that's less sort of maybe observed is that they usually have a hyper or hypo reactivity sensorily. So they often find that their skin react to different clothing types.
Oh, okay.
So particularly I have a student who can't wear school shoes. He just can't, the feeling of them on his feet is something he just can't cope with. And
a bit like my aversion to cotton wool. I can't stand cotton wool.
But in a really
more
extreme way. And so we let him wear trainers and then everything's fine. But it's the same as like he has to wear got another student that has to wear particular shirts. And if you don't buy that particular shirt from that shop, then they feel different. And therefore, even though they're all cotton white shirts, to him they feel different.
So I think perhaps the portrayal of autism in this book might be a little bit superficial in terms of not necessarily identifying all of
it is
symptoms.
It's more stereotypical, I would say, and definitely, like I said, the hyper intelligence is only 5% of autistic diagnosis, so it is kind of really small portrayal. Again, like the schizophrenia, I suppose, is very unlikely. It's actually quite unlikely that he would be highly intelligent in the way that it's portrayed.
Interesting. So as we continue to go through the book, we see that Alex is desperately trying to hide her schizophrenia from her classmates, which is fair enough because of the way she is ridiculed at her previous school. She was called the crazy one, etc. But as we go through the course of the book, her hallucinations seem to increase in frequency and get worse. I thought that the introduction of the hallucinations was interesting, just because I couldn't fully understand how terrifying these could be for a particular person. As we go through the book, we also meet her sister, and I think this is probably the bit that I found the hardest in the entire book, is that her sister is called Charlie. She is a key person in her life. She has lots of interactions with her sister. She hugs her sister in all...
She's a comfort.
Yeah.
She is.
She's there, she's supportive.
When she's in her worst moments, her sister is the one that is allowed to come and cuddle her and sit with her, whereas she shuts everyone else out.
Exactly, but by the time we get to the end of the book, we find out something. This is quite a big spoiler alert, but we find out that Charlie has unfortunately passed away. She is no longer with her sister, so Alex is hallucinating all interactions with Charlie.
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
I found that really hard, the fact that the parents had allowed this, because this happens with the parents, so it's not as if...
They perpetuate it.
Yeah, which one must be really hard for them, because losing a child must be one of the hardest things a parent has to, or hopefully not has to go through. And then to actually have her talking about her as if she's alive all the time.
And interacting with her.
Yeah.
Because her mum still sets a place at the dinner table for her sister. As at points in the book, we see her, she ends up going into hospital because she has an episode at a party where she sees mutant Miles, and she gets told off for not taking her medication and stuff, so she goes back in for 2 weeks in the hospital. And during that time, Charlie is there and is a comfort to her. And then later on, we see that her medication is starting to work, and in the descriptions, we see that she's questioning where Charlie is because Charlie isn't there. Yeah. She's like, Charlie would usually do this, but she's hiding, or Charlie would usually do that, but she is mysteriously absent. Yeah. And when you look back on those points, I don't know, I felt so sad for her.
Yeah.
I mean, her parents are lying to her about this particular hallucination. I also questioned the fact whether, with these hallucinations, because they're visual and auditory hallucinations, can you actually interact with your hallucinations? And I spent quite some time looking at different forums for people with schizophrenia, and it is potentially that is an unlikely scenario, that you can actually interact physically with your hallucinations. It also turns out later that the magic 8 ball is an hallucination. And
she's been holding and shaking that. But I suppose, could you imagine holding and shaking something?
You could probably imagine that more than interactions with an actual person.
Especially she's had to imagine her growing up, so she's had to imagine
the changes over time,
which must be very difficult and hard.
And as I say, I have no personal experience of schizophrenia. So if you know more about this than we do, let us know, because I would love to hear your views and your knowledge on this particular topic. But can you actually interact physically with a visual hallucination?
Yeah.
I just found that quite hard to believe.
I felt it was really hard that it had to be Miles that told her.
And not her parents.
Yeah, and he actually has a go at her parents, I think, saying, you know, how dare you, look what you've done, you've been basically perpetuating this, and you should have told her a long time ago.
But also, how can you then notice if her symptoms are getting worse if one of those particular symptoms is being perpetuated by you?
Yeah, especially as the mum is very much like, take your medication. She's very much like...
which I was really upset.
Hide it from everybody, you know, act normal, do this, that and the other. And she, you know, really, really doesn't want her to be anyone to find out, and she doesn't want her to be feeling all this way, and yet to perpetuate in another way. I just didn't feel that felt right in her character.
No, and I did, as I say, I felt very sorry for Alex, because there are people that she's meant to trust that are betraying that trust.
In the story, though, as a book, it was a interesting twist.
Oh, definitely.
And it made me question everything then. I was like, oh, is the dad real? Is that, you know, what's going on? And it was interesting as a storyline. But yeah, I agree, it doesn't necessarily fit with what the character of the mum would have done. No,
and the fact that it took her 2 minutes to get over as an issue. I think that if someone had done that to me, I think it would have taken more than, I think it was 2 sentences to get over the situation.
And they kind of say, well, she kind of knew, but she didn't know, kind of like her subconscious always knew that she wasn't really there. Is, you know, she takes pictures of her and things like that, doesn't she? 'Cause she shows the book and she says to Miles, what do you see?
And he says like, nothing.
It's just the garden. It's just, the porch. And she's like, I see my sister. And those ones haven't faded over time, I think partly because they're perpetuated, they're supported by her parents.
Exactly.
And the parents are meant to be the people that tell her what's real and what's not real. And that's what Miles points out to them.
As we said previously, there is a slight issue with the mixing up of delusions and hallucinations. At one point, she states that her delusions get worse at night. However, actually, what it really should have been is that her hallucinations get worse at night. So let me just give you an indication of what delusions and hallucinations are. So with a delusion, these are false beliefs that are not based on reality. So for example, you think that you were being harmed or harassed, that certain gestures or comments are directed at you, that you have exceptional ability or fame, that another person is in love with you, or that a major catastrophe is about to occur. Delusions occur in most people with schizophrenia.
So with Alex, that's her belief that the Nazis are out to get her and the communists are going to come and get her. It's the paranoia side of things. So it's those feelings and their emotions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas an hallucination, which I find very difficult to say, hallucination, these usually involve seeing or hearing things that don't exist. Yet the person with schizophrenia, hallucinations have the full force and impact of a normal experience. So this might give us an indication of whether...
If they're the full force of the real experience, then they're going to feel that way. Yeah.
Hallucinations can be in any of the senses. So that's taste, smell, hearing,
I suppose then
visual,
that's touch.
So again, could be. But hearing voices is usually the most common hallucination out of all of them.
And so that's where the seeing her sister and her interacting and the magic 8 ball are all part of those hallucinations.
Definitely.
I found it really interesting to look that up because at the time of reading it, I didn't really know the difference.
Nor did I.
And I agree, they are a bit confused in the book. And I think partly because some of them might happen together. Like you'd get the feelings of paranoia necessarily, and then she would then see,
something
mutant Miles or something. So they probably do get muddled up in that they are together at times.
Yeah, but her life, because she's moved schools and she isn't... The stigma of her schizophrenia hasn't followed her from one school to the other. She does seem to start living what people would see as a normal life.
Yeah.
In inverted commas, because, hey, what is normal really?
Yeah.
But she starts to go to parties and she is obviously doing stuff with Miles, like meeting up after school and stuff. And she's got the club, which is the group of kids that have got to do this community service. So there are now people in her life.
There's one particular that she gets closer with, isn't there, in the club? And she seems to be quite an interesting character that's not explored enough, I think.
Is that Theo?
Theo.
Yeah. You mentioned that her mum, particularly when she has this episode at the party where there's this mutant Miles that comes out of nowhere and tries to attack her. She gets home and her mum is like, you haven't been taking your medication. You need to take it right now. I question whether that's safe because if you are, I don't know, There are times when I forget to take my medication. There are times when I can't remember if I've taken my medication
Well, it becomes such a standard thing that if did I take my medication last Wednesday? Well, I probably did because I wake up and I take it. But did I actually? So I can understand, and especially with somebody who's got schizophrenia, because she then questions in the book. She says, "Well, I think I've been taking it,
but she's not sure."
So I don't understand why her parents weren't supervising this anyway.
And then her mum makes her take her medication. I don't necessarily think that's the safest thing to be doing.
No,
because potentially could be overdosing on something that's
and usually you are meant to take these things about the same time every day.
Yeah, exactly. Also, it mentions that there are limited side effects of her medication. So she says that sometimes she feels a bit nauseous. So again, I did some research. I looked at medication. For schizophrenia, the main types of medication are antipsychotic medications, alongside other interventions that are also known to help, such as psychological treatments. So she also is seeing a therapist during this entire time. Antipsychotic medication should help to get rid of the symptoms, but it can take a few weeks of taking the medicine regularly before it becomes effective. The first generation of drugs were developed in the 1950s, and they were quite nasty.
Yeah.
So there was quite a lot of side effects with those. And then they came out with a newer generation of antipsychotics in the 90s. However, the side effects, and don't get me wrong, not everyone gets the same side effects, but some of the side effects of taking antipsychotics include shaking, trembling, muscle twitches, muscle spasms, which we don't see at all with Alex.
No.
You can also end up with things such as drowsiness, weight gain, blurred vision, constipation, lack of sex drive, although this probably shouldn't be an issue for a teenager, but then it could be. Let's be honest, teenagers, and also a dry mouth. So I think that the book also potentially downplays the impacts of medication.
Yeah, and I think as well, where she's meant to not be taking it, really she should be getting withdrawal symptoms from not taking the medication. So she should have been feeling, I don't know what the withdrawals for that particular medication is, but
I'd have to look into it.
But she, you would notice maybe that even.
I know that if I don't take some of my medication, I definitely have some side effects from not taking it. But anyway, so Miles figures out after this episode where he drives her home and takes her to her mum that she has schizophrenia, but he doesn't tell anyone at school. Yay, Miles!
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, he doesn't exactly go around broadcasting this to anyone. So she continues with her life. The hallucinations continue, and at one point we find her at a local bridge called the Red Witch Bridge, which has a local legend attached to it of a witch that screams in the middle of the night. And it turns out that actually it's Alex who is the person who started this.
Well, they're saying that, the bit that I had with this, often legends about witches are old. They're not usually a modern legend. Yet she's meant to have started this where, shortly before, when she once left her house, when she was having an episode. She was naked, she ran through the woods, she hid under a bridge, and that's where
she screamed.
And she was screaming because she was running away from the Nazis and the communists, and ended up under this bridge. And so her parents found her and brought her home, and that's when she goes to hospital and for more treatment. And it's local people that heard her and got scared by that at the time because she ran past some teenagers. And then that's where the legend starts, that there's this witch in the woods. And I don't know, usually those kind of legends are longer rather than, it just seems a very fresh thing to have happened.
Yeah. So I don't know. You also mentioned, because I didn't pick up on this, but you mentioned, I don't know if you remember, but we talked about perhaps this is also another way her parents are hiding her schizophrenia from everyone.
Yeah.
Because they haven't necessarily put people to rights about what happened, which is fair enough. I don't think that most parents would share that kind of thing. But it just shows a little bit maybe of them perpetuating her paranoia.
And it's also, I think it gives more of a stigma to her condition. She is being described by people around her as a crazy witch in the woods. And so it probably makes her feel that actually sometimes she is that crazy person in the woods because that's what she feels like. So I think it perpetuates that stigmatization, I think.
Through the book, Miles, he runs pranks.
Yeah.
So he pranks people for money, and we find out that he's doing this because his mum is in a psychiatric institution. So he has personal experience with mental health issues, which is probably another reason why he is so supportive of Alex.
Yeah.
But what did you think about these pranks that Miles runs? Coming from your school background, do you think that something like this could happen, does happen?
People do pull pranks on each other. We do end up with that.
For money?
At school. And maybe sometimes it's for money or extra lunch, I don't know. But it is kind of the fact that I think they've kind of used him to do that because of his autism, as if he doesn't understand the consequences and he doesn't care about the people's emotions for what he's doing.
There's definitely a lack of emotional involvement from him, isn't
yeah, and I think that's something with autism that's quite misunderstood. It's not that autistics don't believe that other people have emotions or don't care that they have emotions and that they're upsetting people. It's just they can't read them, so they need to be told that, you know, and learn that this is what someone does when they're sad. And actually a lot of autistics find a lot of guilt in when they do cause upset because they never meant to, because they didn't understand what was going to happen. So I think he's doing this because of his mum, but I also think it's the fact that the way it's portrayed, I think, is a sort of a real stereotype of autism.
Yeah. Alex also is tormented by the stereotypical teenager called Celia, who is one of those people that we all love to hate, but Alex seems to think, or seems to have seen her with her pushy mother trying to get her to do certain things and act in certain ways. What did you think of Celia as a character?
She is the stereotypical mean girl, isn't she? She is that idea. And you do kind of think, I know from working in schools, when girls or anyone is being like that, usually there is a reason. And Alex sometimes questions, you know, or maybe she's like that because I've seen her mum or things like that. And Miles does the same. But yeah, it does seem to be that as a character, that is her definition. She's just mean.
Yeah, definitely. And she is the person that outs Alex at school. Somehow she finds out, probably with this inappropriate relationship with the principal.
I really felt
I think maybe we should go into this particular aspect of the story. So in the story, we have Celia, and she has this odd relationship with the principal. The principal has an obsession with the gym's scoreboard.
Yeah.
This is because at one point it fell off of the wall and it killed someone called Scarlett, and he happened to be in love with Scarlett.
And so was he a pupil at that time? I think
he was a pupil that he met Scarlett, and it was at their 10-year school reunion that the scoreboard fell off the wall and crushed.
Yes. Yeah, I remember now.
Scarlett, and he is the one that tries to save Scarlett by lifting the scoreboard off of Scarlett.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Scarlett is Celia's mum.
Yeah.
So there's this inappropriateness where he seems to keep calling Celia to his office, and they seem to be having some, I don't know, it's odd. This is when the book goes off on a particular tangent, I think. I think this is where I start to go, hang on a minute, is this...
Yeah, because they seem to imply that Celia finds out about her Alex's schizophrenia from the principal. So one, he's divulged some very, very personal information about another student to a student, information that he knows isn't going to go down well with this girl. And it's kind of implied he's done this because they're in a relationship of some kind, that he's actually sexually abusing her.
Which, again, at this point, Alex is paranoid about there being some kind of relationship between the two.
Yeah.
I think that if it had continued to be part of her hallucinations and delusions, that it would have been a better storyline. However,
the fact that it actually becomes true.
That's the bit I question.
I wonder if the author needed some way of her being outed and that it couldn't be Miles. I think she could have found up another way. It could have been that a conversation was overheard or something like that, or they saw... I just think there could have been another way of that coming out rather than this... Abuse of this girl. And in a way it does, you know, you can see why she's mean and horrible if that's happening to her and
I'm not saying that this is never gonna happen or hasn't ever happened in history, but I do think that all of a sudden this relationship and this inappropriateness comes out of the blue. It's like we're getting into the story, it's trundling along nicely, it's about Alex, and then all of a sudden Celia's being abused by the principal.
To justify the obsession with the scoreboard.
Yeah, it's a bit odd, I thought. Although it does continue, because obviously she's hallucinated.
He loves that scoreboard, and I don't understand why he loves the scoreboard, even though it killed the woman that he loved. You would think that he'd hate the scoreboard for killing the person that he loved, rather than the other way around.
Worship it. It was a bit odd, the worshipping. and giving the scoreboard offerings. That was odd.
Yeah, they have a school ceremony where they all offer something to the scoreboard, which... yeah, it became very strange. And you do question, like you were saying, is this part of Alex's hallucinations and delusions and paranoia and that, or is it actually real? And the way it's written as if it's real, I just, at that point the book became a bit absurd to me.
Yeah, I think maybe my respect for the book drops off at that point, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we gave it lower stars.
Yeah, I think so too. Although it was an easy read and it has highlighted the topic of schizophrenia, something that I didn't know much about, and as a result I've gone away and done some research on. I think that's probably a good thing that's come out from this book.
Yeah.
So there's also another school legend about a python.
I love this one.
And so for the whole entire year, Alex has been seeing this python pop out from ceiling tiles around the school, and you go, this has to be her hallucination.
She's completely assumed that it is a hallucination.
I assumed it was a hallucination.
Yes.
You kind of go, surely this couldn't happen. And then all of a sudden it turns out that it is real.
Yeah.
And that it made me laugh, because I was like...
well, it's like wrapping itself around her body before she realises that everyone else is seeing the snake as well. And so she's like, oh, okay, it is real. And it's just... it was one of those moments where actually the book made me laugh, and I thought it was quite a funny scene, and it made me realise that actually I couldn't imagine living in a world where I don't know stuff's real or not, and how dangerous it could be, because actually that python could have bitten her, and she it could have been really bad.
Do pythons bite? I think they strangle you, like squeeze you.
Okay.
Which is why it wraps itself around.
But it made me realise just how dangerous delusions and hallucinations can be, where you don't know if a danger is real or not.
Exactly. It makes it awkward, doesn't it? But it turns out that Tucker, wonderful Tucker, has been feeding this python, and he's had it in a tank, in a whatever they call them, vivarium, I think it is.
Yeah, because
in the janitor's office.
Because every year there's a senior school prank, and I think his idea is that he is actually going to release a snake on prank day. I
think that he was just looking after it. He has no friends at school, so he's like, I'll just befriend this python. Again, it was a bit odd.
In the janitor's closet, and the janitor was fine with this.
Yeah. I want to meet these people, this janitor that's fine with this kid hanging out in his office.
God.
Yeah, it's a bit odd.
And he hasn't noticed it's escaped quite a few times.
Yeah, because she keeps seeing it. It's not the first time she's seen it.
Unless the earlier ones are
hallucinations,
and the last one is actually the only real one.
That's when it gets complicated. This is making my mind hurt at this point, because it could be.
Yeah.
So it turns out that she wasn't hallucinating the snake, but it also turns out that she was hallucinating Celia's mother.
Yes.
And that there was no interactions between Celia and her mother because her mother's dead. Yeah, it gets very complicated because you can't understand. You've got to try and piece together what is real and what isn't. And as you said, that in reality, that's got to be awful.
Yeah, and these are times when she's meant to be taking her medication as well. So you would think that the delusions and the hallucinations would be less, because she's meant to be on the medication. It's after she's had a big episode and gone into hospital and come back out and told the school she had mono.
Yes, that is true. But for some strange reason, along with this conspiracy theory between something going on between Celia and the principal, he conspires to drop the scoreboard on Miles because Celia is obsessed with Miles. Do you remember that part? That again is another bit that made me go,
yeah, so this principal isn't only, having an inappropriate relationship with a student, he also wants to murder one of the other students.
Because Celia likes him.
Yeah, to get into a position of being a principal, I mean, I know I'm talking about the UK educational system, but I'm pretty sure even in America where this is set, that it's, they should have a lot more, they shouldn't be able to get to a position of principal and be able to do those things and no one's noticed. Yeah. I also just think it's not a very good representation of my profession,
Yeah.
It's something that you don't do. You don't murder students, and you don't have inappropriate
physical relationships with students. Just people know. But instead of the scoreboard, it does come down, it does fall down, but Alex somehow realises what's going to happen before it happens, and she jumps in and she saves the day because she saves Miles, but the scoreboard lands on her And so she ends up in hospital. While she's in hospital, Miles gets beaten up by his abusive father.
Yeah.
And she breaks out of hospital because she's worried about what Miles is going to be doing because he wants revenge. Yeah, so at the end, we see that Alex has made the decision that because her hallucinations are getting so bad that she feels the need to go back into hospital.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably the best thing for her to do because it's obvious that her medication is not necessarily working. Her parents have been lying to her. She needs a bit of a fresh start.
I didn't like the bit that when she's in the hospital, she overhears a conversation. And part of that conversation is they think as well that she actually was the one that dropped the scoreboard.
Yeah.
And I was like, just because she could predict it, and I just thought, well, why would you put yourself under it and save people from it if your idea was to drop it? I just, at that point, I actually feel her parents should have stood up for her a bit more. I feel that they should
They're
have...
a bit weak, I think.
Yeah, they should be there protecting their daughter from the stereotype and that kind of negativity.
So Alex does go to hospital. She decides she's going in, but she's managed to negotiate to go to the school's graduation ceremony that she should be graduating at, but doesn't because she's ill and she's going into hospital.
Which I think is really unfair. I think that all she had to do was walk over a stage and sit there. I'm sure she could have managed.
I'm guessing there's some exams in there, though. I don't know the American education system, but I'm guessing she would have been expected to do some exams.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what would she have done?
She's allowed to go watch, but she's only allowed to go watch from behind all of the stairs where no one else is, with 2 orderlies with her.
And also with handcuffs.
Yeah, which I found really hard to handle in the book. I did not like the fact that they insisted on her being handcuffed to watch a ceremony with 2 grown-ups looking after her at the same time.
I don't know what they were thinking she was going to do.
Well, it's almost like they wanted to put her in one of the white jackets with their arms around her. It is very much like... It's
that stereotypical view of how people go into hospital.
And how she's suddenly very dangerous. And she's considered dangerous by the school now because she's got schizophrenia, even though the principal must have known about this beforehand. So this idea that she's dangerous at this point, I think, is only justified by the side comment that she's the person that dropped this scoreboard, even though I just don't think they've got any evidence to support that.
Yeah. So really that's the main outline of the book.
Yeah.
So I think we should end by giving
a sort of lowdown of how we feel.
Yeah, definitely. So do you think that you would recommend this book to other people to read?
I would, because I found it very interesting to learn a bit more about schizophrenia, and it is a nice, young, easy read. It's good for, I think, young people to read and see mental health in an everyday setting. So I would recommend it, but I would caveat that with, it's not necessarily a true representation, and that people should then from there do their own research about these things to find out a bit more.
Definitely. I would probably agree with that. I think the reason why I gave it 2 stars was probably because of the ending of the book, with the all of a sudden child abuse is thrown into the mix. Also the fact that as a result of learning more about schizophrenia, with doing the research for this podcast, I realised how much is missing from the book. I mean, I think perhaps potentially that the portrayal of schizophrenia in this book is a bit romanticised as such. So people readily know about hallucinations and delusions because it's in the media. However, there is no mention of what they call the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So that's the things such as not washing, not being able to leave the house, not looking after yourself. All of the things that we do in a normal day-to-day life, all of those are missing.
Yeah.
And with schizophrenia, I spent again some time looking to find out whether you could have the positive symptoms, which are the hallucinations and the delusions, without the negative symptoms, but I don't think you necessarily can. I think you can function at a certain level, but I think there is still some issues associated with negative symptoms, and these negative symptoms are not only associated with schizophrenia, they're also people with depression will have negative symptoms. So I think that romanticised version of schizophrenia is what probably made me give it 2 stars.
Yeah, I mean, the only time she doesn't want to really leave is when after she's had the episode and she's kept at home and she makes a fort with her dad, and then when it comes to going to a party and she's like, I'm not sure I want to go, but at the same time, well, that's most teenagers, and I think any anxiety around that because she's so worried about people finding out.
I also think I found the fact that her parents are lying to her quite difficult to handle, which is another aspect of the story that really got to me, purely because the one or the two people in life that she should be able to trust are her parents, and they are lying to her face about Charlie still being alive.
Yeah.
I mean, not only is it got to have been difficult for them to see the interactions between Alex and her hallucinated sister, but just being able to, I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's just hard to be able to do that to your daughter and keep that going, and yet you don't want them to...
You want them to be well, but then you don't want to tell them about
this particular hallucination.
Yeah, and the fact that they think that they're protecting her, because Charlie died when Alex was in the hospital having another of her episodes. And so, I don't know, it's difficult to not get angry at this. Yeah.
No, I agree.
I felt angry for Alex.
Yeah, and I think that they want you to, in a way, because they want you to, like Maya was for standing up to them and stuff like that. No, I agree. I do think the parents are depicted in quite a weak way and not necessarily supportive of hers I would like them to have been.
Yeah, but I do think that it is a fantastic book because it is raising issues of schizophrenia for young people.
Yeah.
Because this is a book that is aimed at young adults and older adults. I mean, I quite enjoyed it to a certain extent. It did make me think, and it made me question how much I actually realised or knew about schizophrenia. I think that's probably one of the positives that came out of this book.
Definitely. I just think, there were a few absurdities I couldn't get over, and that's why it's got a low score from us, really.
Well, so that was Made You Up by Francesca Zappia. Our next book is Anxiety Girl Falls Again by Lacey London, which is the second book that talks about Sadie Valentine. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you feel that you need additional support with your mental health, please call the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Next week, I will be doing a deep dive into schizophrenia. The following week, we will be reading Anxiety Girl Falls Again by Lacey London, which is book 2 in the Sadie Valentine series. If you'd like to find out more details, please visit our website at mentalhealthbookclub.com. We would really love to hear what you think about this podcast. Please get in touch with us at our Facebook page, which is the Mental Health Book Club, or at our Twitter, which is at MHBC_podcast. And if you like the podcast, please share it with your family and friends and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.